Overrated, underrated. I think over time there has been a common redefining of these two terms. Let's reestablish the basics. Overrated simply means something is held higher than the actual quality, and underrated means something is held lower than the actual quality. That does not mean something overrated is genuinely bad, and it doesn't mean something underrated is genuinely good. It just means there is a widely held, unfair perception of something, making it sound better or worse than it really is. Today, I'm going to do a bit of a rebuttal against what I think is the more recent view in favor of the older popular opinion. Initial D has better writing than Wangan Midnight. Of course, I need to make some disclaimers before I can make my case. Firstly, I am comparing their anime adaptations, not the original source material or any supplementary material. Secondly, I'm going to make all of my claims from evaluating their writing and storytelling, not the quality of the animation, soundtrack, voice acting, strictly the narrative storytelling of each of them. In fact, while I'll be saying that Initial D has better writing, I do think Wangan Midnight, as an anime, has some features that exceed the quality of Initial D. Thirdly, I will be using some broad stroke generalizations when referring to collective opinions that are not my own. The sample group I am basing these opinions on are not simply anime fans, but rather from an online car community I am a part of that happens to have a lot of members who like anime too. As such, the generalizations I make are not reflective of the broader anime watching public. Lastly, I will not be summarizing their plots in their entirety. Instead, I will be discussing narrative elements from both series, but I will still warn about spoilers for Initial D and Wangan Midnight, and also Top Gun Maverick. Initial D's narrative is well organized, at least most of it is. For a street racing anime, it may sound strange, but the strongest decision plot-wise in this story is that races with the main character are spread out. Every race holds a certain weight because they are built up by preceding episodes. Let's take a look at First Stage. The first official race between Takumi and Keisuke is built up for 3 entire episodes. By the time the race starts, we already know Takumi as a character and his motives for racing. Plus, every character and viewer both want to see Takumi race, and yet he doesn't want to. Natsuki is higher on his priority list, so viewers have to pay attention to her as well. Then the show takes another 3 episodes to build up for Nakazato. Once again, they reaffirm Takumi's dispositions and motives, set up Nakazato's dispositions and motives, and then also establish the concept of Keisuke now having stakes in Takumi, because anyone who defeats Takumi will imply a result against Keisuke. Want to guess how many episodes it takes to build up to Shingo? Did you guess 3? You're right. The 3 episodes reaffirm Takumi's dispositions and motives, set up Shingo's dispositions and motives, and then now adds a new point of tension where Keisuke and Nakazato are both hoping Takumi wins, even though Shingo and Nakazato are technically on the same team. I'm not going to go through all the details about the race against the Angels of Usi or the finale against Ryosuke. I'm also not going to go over the other stages all that much because I think you get my point by now. Initial D handles its plot by taking time to make sure the viewers know exactly what a race means before it starts. It allows the viewer to be able to watch the race scenes without having to cram in more exposition during the action. Characterization in Initial D is perfectly executed. Takumi's resistance to street racing at the beginning of the show is the best decision regarding the tension the writers could have made. They play it for comedy, but it also helps give necessary narrative tension. We get to see Takumi's 2 sides fighting for control, which makes him a stronger character as he eventually comes to accept and embrace that he is a racer. The side characters of Initial D are pretty strong too. Bunta is my favorite, and the other characters all serve the narrative in unique ways as well. As annoying as Itsuki is, even he is important enough that the overall plot couldn't happen without him. It passes a yardstick I use when peer reviewing other writers' stories as well as checking my own. Too many characters will always completely ruin a story. I prevent this by going through the entire plot, but without a character, to see if all the main events still happen without them. If the plot still works, then I either remove the character or consolidate what I like about them into a character the plot can't happen without. Villains in Initial D are a fun concept. Very rarely is there a straight up bad guy. After all, it's street racing, which is ultimately a hobby for the characters. There are rules, there are reputations, and there is honor. Yeah, Shingo is a jerk who almost killed Itsuki, and later in the series, Aikawa and Ichijo tried to have a gang beat Project D with pipes, but for the most part the antagonists are strictly opponents. In fact, they are often professional racers before and after races, and usually even become friends or at least allies with the main characters after important races. Takumi even asks for advice from former opponents, who often oblige out of respect for what Takumi was able to accomplish. The first one that comes to mind is the fact the writers are really backed into a corner. The narrative only works if Takumi is undefeated in real races. As such, the writers have to make increasingly more irritating excuses for Takumi to win. For example, first stage sticks with stuff that usually amounts to skill issue, but by the end of the series, it's stuff like leaf piles, and the most annoying development in the entire show, Fujiwara Zone, where Takumi can basically just teleport. The most egregious mistake is a violation of the most well-known rule in the book, Chekhov's gun. For the uninitiated, Chekhov's gun is named after a quote attributed to the Russian author Anton Chekhov, reading, "If in the first act you have hung a pistol on the wall, then the following act it must be fired. Otherwise, don't put it there." In other words, don't tease something that doesn't happen. In Top Gun Maverick, they mentioned the enemy having F-14s at the base, so Maverick is now obliged to fly an F-14 in the story. In Initial D, Keisuke sets up for a rematch against Takumi multiple times, and it never happens. I guarantee the only reason it doesn't happen is because in addition to the corner of Takumi can't lose they've painted themselves in, they've also made Keisuke undefeatable. The story sets up for a rematch between two characters who fundamentally can't lose, and know that a tie would be too cheesy. Killing the 8-6's engine a second time at the end really was just their ticket out of confronting that situation. If you haven't noticed, most of the issues with Initial D have come up in later seasons. In fact, I think that's what makes it so hard to compare against Wangan Midnight. The latter only has one season, so I really don't want to talk about First Stage, but that's not necessarily fair. The unevenness of quality in Initial D is pronounced enough that I believe Initial D's accepted status as overrated comes from a broad love of the first half of the story, and the second half simply not living up to expectations. The beginning earns tons of positive opinions, and the second half makes people see positive opinions as unearned. I'd go as far as to say that even just removing Fifth Stage would increase the overall perception of the show. It simply tried to do too much and yet too little at the same time. Fourth was at least different enough to justify its existence, and the Takumi section of Third Stage was actually better than Second Stage in my honest opinion. But now it's time to leave the mountain passes and merge onto the highway. Let me be clear. I like Wangan Midnight. I enjoy watching it. So the following discussion might sound like I hate it, but I really don't. It's just that I'm trying to objectively look at how these two shows are written, and Wangan Midnight is somewhat broken on a fundamental level. I still think you should watch it though. I can't really go episode to episode like I did with Initial D. The reason is because of the first issue I'd like to bring up, which is Wangan Midnight's complete lack of time organization. Weeks or months will be skipped by cutting to the next scene, and at most there might be a line of dialogue about it. The story is moving so fast that a lot of character development relies heavily on crutches. Sometimes it's flashbacks, which thankfully are visible enough to not cause too much extra confusion, but most of it is through exposition poorly hidden in dialogue. In fact, this is a teaching moment. When you're writing dialogue, you need to put in the effort to make sure it's readable. Don't spend a bunch of lines on characters exchanging pleasantries for no reason, and definitely don't use dialogue to fill in character gaps. Part of that is remembering that people don't usually state the obvious in an expository way to each other in real life. Wangan Midnight does it a lot, and it's so blatantly an attempt at filling the viewer in on information that the characters themselves don't need. The thing is, I get irritated with everyone's blathering on about show don't tell because it's the easiest writing advice to say in the world. But then I watch something like Wangan Midnight and shiver at the fact that I'll have to hear that line parroted for the rest of my life because tell not show is still happening. Another issue in Wangan Midnight is the sudden appearances and disappearances of characters. Now, some people defend the characters popping in and out of the story as something that makes the show more realistic, as highway street racers often do just show up or vanish. The glaring problem in this argument is that it's not the story's intention at all. Characters in the show are meeting and forming personal relationships with each other, and the characters themselves know where and when everything is going. As I mentioned before, the flow of time is completely inconsistent. It's not that the show is trying to mimic something deep about real street racers, it's just that these characters' entries and exits are glossed over or skipped entirely. Episode 7 is probably the worst offender of them all, and serves as an example of just how cluttered this show can be sometimes. Episode 6 ends on a tease for a three-way race that may go wrong. Episode 7 takes place after the fact, with a new side character learning about the race and its crash from a newspaper. We learn who he is with a bunch of ham-fisted dialogue lines and multiple flashbacks. The episode covers a lot of passing time and never really specifies anything that important. Like, yeah, Akio will fix the Devil Z, but when are we? It's just so hard to care about any of these side characters, and then as suddenly as they appeared, they were gone. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, then you'll come to the same conclusion I did. The story is compressed. The thing is, the anime is an adaptation of a manga. Initial D was too, but Initial D didn't try to fit every single major plot event into a single season. Wangan Midnight does. Now, to be clear, I haven't read either manga, but I think the and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened layout that Wangan Midnight has is evidence enough. It is both trying to shove everything in, and yet also cutting way too much out. And yet, I still like this show. It's a testament to just how well done some of the story's ideas are. Like Initial D, there are no bad guys, just professional rivalries that are conducted with nothing but genuine friendliness. The same group of tuners all collaborate on all of the cars. The drivers like to spend time with each other. They even help each other become better. It creates a sense of community around them and underlines the hobbyist nature of what they're doing. I also like that the Devil Z is hinted at being somewhat supernatural. Now, I tend to believe the explanation of the Devil Z's crankshaft and the car's overall all-or-die-trying design is the real reason behind its tendency to kiss guardrails, and it's just the culture of street racing to see cars as having some type of mechanical soul. At the same time, the Devil Z did flinch when Akio arrived, so who knows. To check my work, I reached out to some of my friends whom I know watched both shows. Only 2 replied, but my findings were interesting. While there were other questions, I think the following are the most interesting for the purposes of this video. I asked them questions based on previous answers to get a general idea of how they felt, so the questions were not verbatim, but similar enough to work. Which show would you say is the most fun to watch? Probably Initial D. Wangan Midnight is more my thing, but Initial D has more going on, for lack of a better word. Of course, that tapers off after Stage 2. It depends. Initial D tends to be more flashy, and fun if you overlook the terrible CGI. I think the use of music and the buildup of tension throughout the stages is good. Wangan? Well, it's fun, but it's also very inconsistent, and the writing, especially for Akio, is a bit ridiculous. Do you think Stage 1 has better writing than Wangan Midnight, but Wangan Midnight has better writing than later stages? Hard to say, really. With Wangan Midnight, you actually watch Akio progress into becoming a good driver, an actual character arc. But it's not that well written. Meanwhile, Takumi does not have much of an arc, but it's better written. Not precisely. Both are incredibly ridiculous. But the glaring issues rear their heads faster on Wangan Midnight because it tries to jam a whole series into 26 episodes. Do you think Wangan Midnight would have been better written if it was organized more like Initial D? Absolutely. Most anime adaptations do not have enough time to expand upon every character. You should be focusing on the MC until you get a second season, and that's if. Yes and no. pacing is all over the place for both, in my honest opinion. A good example is how Stage 1 takes place over basically 6 months, while 4th Stage, if I remember correctly, is like 3 years. The issue with Wangan, in my honest opinion, is that by focusing on the relationships of the 3 to 4 main characters, the side characters and weekend villains tend to be very flat or have basically zero arc. Do you think either show gets put into an unfair light, good or bad, because of the other show? As in, Initial D is critiqued harder for being overrated, whereas Wangan Midnight might be given leniency for being underrated. In Wangan Midnight's case, yes. Initial D, not so much. I do think it's as bad as most critics describe it. No. I think those opinions tend to surface around fan communities. Initial D isn't even acknowledged much more than its score, if we're being frank. Both are okay. Nowhere near a masterpiece, but entertaining enough. I'm sure if more people responded to my interview requests, I'd have better sampling for real conclusions. Instead, I want you to have a broader takeaway. Neither show is perfect, but they are both fun. I almost wonder if discussing them critically is even worthwhile. As someone who loves cars and knows a lot about them, neither show is realistic, they just picked different things to fictionalize for different parts. But otherwise, both shows are the same. When I started writing this script, I wanted to conclude that the love people have for Wangan Midnight is mostly due to the idea that Initial D is overrated. After all, it's hard to say something is bad without giving something good to compare it to. While there are other racing anime, only Wangan Midnight is relatively modern and about street racing. As the other option, it is destined to forever be Initial's opponent. And that makes me sad. Rewatching Wangan Midnight angered me with its disorganization and nonsensical use of time, and yet I really liked watching it. Saying it's better than Initial D to be a contrarian only hurts Wangan Midnight. I believe there are more flaws than successes in Wangan Midnight's story, and yet I still enjoy it. In a strange way, Wangan Midnight is much like the Devil's E itself. Not that it was intended to be, well, let's be honest, it's not intelligently written enough for that, but because I don't want to like it, and yet the show haunts my mind. I want more. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I'm still new to this whole video essay thing, so any feedback would be appreciated. I have a fiction series based on Minecraft running right now on my channel. I have 2 frankly better series I'm going to be launching in the very near future. Plus, I'm going to continue making these writing commentaries, so be sure to subscribe for more.